So I set this time apart. I knew we just read the epilogue, but and feel free to talk about whatever you want to talk about. I'd love to hear what NVC is doing for you personally, or where it's like, oh, this is not working, or even just about the epilogue, which is a really sweet poem. You know, like it's a really lovely little story he tells on his Jewish grandmother, I think. Like, it's kind of amazing. So let me just open the floor to where you are with this.
You want to talk?
Sure. I guess practicing some receiving appreciation and giving appreciation. So one place to practice was we always go at 6:30 in the morning to the Safeway store. And there's our favorite person is Brenda. And we're really always say how Brenda, we're glad she's here so early in the morning. And
She's the checker.
And she's the lady that checks us out. And how are you doing today, Brenda? And one day she was a little bit off. And that was because her husband has gotten valley fever. You get that over here in the desert. And it's a pulmonary type of disease. And he was struggling with it. It was affecting her. So every time now we go in to the Safeway store, we talk to Brenda. And it sort of makes her day. Even the people that are bagging, we bring our own canvas bags. So we're a little bit odd. We don't have plastic. And they all learn about Brenda. And I think everybody's sort of gathering around her. So I would say it's just the giving and receiving of appreciation. That even waiter when we go to an outside restaurant, same thing. But I think the biggest case we've had is Brenda.
How does it feel for you to try this way of appreciation?
It's really invigorating. Early in the morning, nobody else in the store except the stockers that are stocking the shelves. Mm-hmm. And this lady is very dedicated, very, very has gone through the COVID period being a Safeway checker, and has stayed well, has not gotten sick. And a lot of times people in the grocery line are grumpy. And especially early in the morning, so she has to be cheery. So I have a lot of sympathy for Safeway checkers.
Thank you. Rhonda, please.
Well, I finished this book before I left. So when I got to the little flat with my daughter Jenna and her fiance Kai, Kai was doing a lot of the cooking, which was kind of a new thing. And I was very, very specific at how I complimented him on his cooking, about the flavors, the taste, and the quality. And I told him about the nonviolent communication and the steps and all that. And I think they thought it was great. And I think he really appreciated the specific information. Mm-hmm. And it actually made it much easier for me to connect with him and talk with him. He's a bit quiet, but it made it easier for both of us. It made us all feel good.
Really glad to hear.
I too kind of trying to connect more with the compliments and being more specific. So I appreciate how he outlines why it's important for the receiver, but I think it's also really important for me as trying to give it to better understand and, forcing me to get to better understand feelings or enumerate them, or not enumerate, but to really pull apart, what does it really mean? And so what is it that I like about it? So I think, yes, clearly it helps the person receive it, but I appreciate how it makes me step back and try to think about it. Mm. But using but as far as the other non-violent communication techniques, I'm still not using it in the moment. I'm thinking of lots of times afterwards, oh, that would have been a good time to try to use it or to stop and think, and that might have been good. So, but I'm still not incorporating it in the moment like I would like to. But want to, still working on it.
Does anybody have thoughts for Adele on working in the moment? Just curious.
I have a hard time with that too. The most place I'm trying to do that. First, I have to be mindful of like, okay, remember to think about this way. Usually is at work. Like I have a lot of opportunities to meet people kind of where they are. And some people are having a hard time, not necessarily about allergies, but just about life and stuff. And so it's really hard to, it actually seems odd. I don't know. It's harder for me to like ask them a question about what they are feeling or like make a guess about what they are feeling than it is for like, it seems it's like more difficult than prior to NVC, like when I would be able to connect to patients, if that makes any sense at all, like making that guess of their feelings. Like I'm thinking about one woman who's like going through this new diagnosis and trying to figure out exactly what's going on. And she started crying. And so I just, I was like, okay, I'm going to try to use NVC to see where these tears are coming from. And I like guessed all the emotions wrong, you know, like, and it was weird because I'm like, usually, you know, if somebody like a patient starts crying or is having a hard time, like, it's easier for me to just sort of sit there and listen than it is for me to like come up with what they're feeling, if that makes any sense. But I think it was just thinking about this one particular person, it was an interesting experience because, you know, I was wrong with some of the feelings, right? And so she was like, no, it's not really that, but it did help her sort of tease apart what the feelings that she was having.
Mhm.
Anyway, so that's been my experience with like using it in the moment. And like, I'm talking a handful of times because it's really hard to do. Yeah.
Darlene, please.
Even when we're wrong, it still helps us connect with who we're talking to or who we're listening to, because it lets them know that we're trying. We want to know, we want to understand. And they're usually pretty good about helping us understand. And like you said, when they help us understand, it helps them understand their own feelings when they find the words behind the emotions to explain the emotions. So it's not a mistake to make a mistake. It's still a success when we try and we make a mistake.
I do want to second this idea that it's in some ways like harder and more awkward than it was before. And I'm not sure if it's because just I'm self-conscious or other people are, or both. Like I've tried the gratitude practice, and I'm trying to grow into it, whether people want me to do it or not, you know, but like I did this with an email with somebody, and you know, like your blank made me feel blank because blank. And I got an email back that was like, wow, okay, like I'm not sure how it was so amazing for you. You know, like it was like they had a hard time receiving this thing. And I was like, well, okay, but you know, it would be nice if I had like effusive gratitude for even the smallest things. But it, you know, it did create this little bit of awkwardness. I also know that in some ways I find myself like, my wife, who is not real into this completely, will also catch me. Like yesterday, I was talking about walking the dog and how she makes me crazy. And she was like, no, you choose to be crazy. It's like, you know, let's only do that with people. Let's not do that with our dog. Anyway, but she's right, you know, and then there's this other area that's super tough where like, I'll notice somebody's got, let's say, a new haircut or they painted their house. And I'll want to say something like, I really like your blank, instead of, I see you cut your hair. How do you like it? And when you ask people, how do you like it? They're like, like I think people have a hard time with that question in general, or like, oh, I see you've painted your home. Are you enjoying the color you picked? Like, yeah, it's weird, but the alternative is me evaluating, which is like, I really like your color. Well, that isn't why I painted it, like, well, maybe it was. I don't know. Like it's a little bit funny. Like it feels artificial, and I think it's just because no one bothers to ask. No one bothers to ask. The only kind of questions you get are like, have you lost weight? Which either is like a good thing or an accusation. But you know what I mean? Like it's not like, hey, how's, I don't know. Anyway, it's funny when you start to think like, oh, this person looks different. Am I going to ask them if they've lost weight, or like, are they enjoying their health? It's just like a little bit weird in that. But I think those are temporary growth pains, because I know that if somebody actually communicated they were interested in knowing how I enjoyed the new color in my office, I probably would tell them, and that would be nice if I trusted that they actually wanted to hear more than it's great.
Well, I think you have, it's okay to be selective of who to share with your feelings beyond, oh, it's great. Sometimes in that moment, it was just a quick, how are you? But they're really trying to move on, you just have, you do have to kind of evaluate each situation, and to who do you want to give the full answer to, and who do you not want to or don't need to, or.
Yeah, and I have to be honest, it also reminds me, like, who am I looking to be evaluated by? Like if I do some work and I say like, how do you like this? I'm really just setting myself up for a double bind, right? I mean, because if they say I don't like it, then I'm going to feel like, what's your problem? And if they say I do like it, then I'm not convinced we actually got any closer in our relationship. You know what I mean? Like but I find myself asking that stuff all the time, looking for evaluation.
In our writing projects, we don't call it critique, we just call it a response.
Mm-hmm.
And we asked to look at something that was really powerful in the piece and something you wanted to hear more of, but we call it pointing. And that's exactly what he's talking about here. You're pointing to specifics to tell people what they did a good job at, or what you appreciate of them doing. I also love the poem at the end, because we've sheltered so many people during Hurricane Ike. We had a family of 7 from New Orleans that literally dropped at our doorstep with a few clothes in a plastic bag, and that was all they had. And
their dog.
And their dog. And their house was totally consumed with water up to the ceiling. And when they went back, Helen said it was worse than any horror movie she'd ever seen.
Wow.
Because everything was black on the furniture and so on. It was turned over. The stuffing had come out of stuffed chairs. But we did a lot of listening during those months afterwards with the Killian family. But they're part of our family now.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd ask the kids there about what would they like, what do they think they should do next? Should they stay in Houston, or should they go back to New Orleans? And each had been successful in getting jobs for 3 of them. Got one of them at the high school, and another one worked in a law firm, another one worked in a restaurant. So they were fitting into Houston, and they all wanted to go back. Only the youngest daughter suggested one time that, why don't you guys move out and we'll just live in your house, which really embarrassed her parents. But she was the outspoken one, and that we actually gone to the wedding of a couple of them in New Orleans. But that was, things like that get thrown upon you. And this was a case of a family of 6 plus a dog, and you figure out how to, it can be very invigorating from the standpoint you're helping out and a family under duress. And they looked carefully at pictures to see whether the house was still underwater during for Katrina.
Darlene, please.
This week, Richard and I went for a fancy anniversary dinner. And in that process, from another room, a different waiter than ours, this tall, nice looking black man came walking to our table with this huge big grin on his face. He was so excited to see us, and I immediately recognized him as someone that Richard and I had worked with 7 or 8 years ago, when we had first started doing some financial counseling and mentoring with people who were in need. And this young man, when we started working with him, was literally homeless, living out of a car, was trying to be a waiter at a very low end cafe. And he really wanted some help, wanted to learn how to manage the meager little bit of money that he was making. And so we worked with him for several months, probably about a year and a half. And then we all kind of went our separate ways. And so this was the first time I had seen him in about 7 years. And he was a different person. He looked stronger. He was well dressed. He was he made good eye contact. He was just so different. And I watched him and Richard talking finances at the table. They were talking about budgets and safety accounts. And as they were talking, there was kind of a lull. And I said, Daryl, I sense a big difference in you. You seem so much more confident, so much more sure of yourself. How are you feeling about the changes in your life? And he just got this big grin, and it told us how he was feeling. He was so happy, and so he was more confident, and he felt like his life was on a positive trajectory. And it felt so good to be able to connect with him and let him know I could see the changes in him. And he was expressing gratitude, and I was feeling gratitude for the changes that I was seeing. So it was an opportunity to say, I see you and I see the changes you've made. And it was an opportunity for him to receive that gratefully. So that felt really, really good.
That's a wonderful story. Thank you. Julia, it seemed like you were maybe getting ready to weigh in about a minute or two ago.
Yeah, I don't really fully remember what I was going to say. I had a thought. You said something about like that, the idea of outward evaluation. One, like the desire that we have to just sort of evaluate everything, and then also on the flip side of that, like the desire or the seeking of outward evaluation of us. And I guess approval, maybe. I don't know. I'm just playing with those ideas in my head of, I don't know where that comes from and how that shapes who we are, starting out as like kids. I just think about like with my boys and the outward evaluation that they receive from myself, but then school and other people, and how that just shapes and sort of sets us. I'm thinking about myself too, how that shapes and sets us up to seek that approval like throughout our life, right? Like that idea of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, and like how how that can just, I don't know, I'm having a hard time articulating, but how that can just sort of guide your decisions about anything based off of the evaluation of others or what other people will think of that. And I think that that's just such a big part of our society, that pressure, that outward pressure. And so I just think of how that affects, how that has affected me, and then how that affects my boys. Like I think of this instant, Jack and Peter went to go get their COVID shots on Monday, and we went to CVS, and the person administering the shot, or I guess it was like the assister, Peter was a mess. Jack was much more like in control, but the lady was trying to distract them from the process. And so she was asking Jack, oh, do you play any sports? No. And he's like, oh, do you get good grades? Do you get all A's? And I thought that was just sort of an interesting question. I mean, I don't judge her at all. I mean, I guess I am judging her a little bit, but thank you for trying to distract my child and give them a COVID shot. But just this idea of asking this question of, do you get good grades? Do you get all A's? And Jack said, well, what are A's? He doesn't know what that means. And then he said, well, the lowest grade I've ever gotten is an 84. And I'm like, there was a little part of me that just was like really sad about the fact that that was something that he knows already. I don't know. I feel like I'm going on a tangent. Sorry.
No, I think it's really, really fair. And like, it's funny, he says that back in that first chapter about the word good. And, like, I love to use the word good. Like people will come up and say, your daughter was so good. And what they mean is quiet, right? Or timid, and like, again, I find myself saying like, wanting to say like, good job. And I get the intention, but it's like, I think I'm buying it. It's like a little bit of a crisis, but how I'll tell myself good job, and it's sort of like, oh, I don't know, maybe I could have done better job, like better meaning what? I was going to be more quiet, or I was going to be like more professionally dressed. Like it's just this really strange thing. I was helping out this, I don't know that I was helping, but the church in Friendswood is hiring a new priest. And there's a link over there who sort of asked me, would you do a mock interview with our team so that we can practice interviewing, and I said, sure, why not, and the whole time I'm doing this, I realized I was probably like cattier than I would be if I was looking for a job. But boy, interviews are terrible. The interview questions are awful. Like one of the questions, and by the way, I'm not calling them out. Like this is just what the process is, right? What's the thing you're proudest of as a priest? And I was like, gosh, if anybody answers that question, you should not hire them, right? Like if they tell you one thing they've done, like you don't want to hire that person. Like I can tell you something I enjoyed this week, but like the one thing I'm proudest of, you want me to like simmer down my whole career into what? But I ask crazy stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, it's this thing, or the question was, how do you prepare for a sermon? And I can tell you that's like one of my least favorite questions, because if I answer honestly, no one's going to like the answer. I know that. I know if I really answer, and I did, because I'm not looking for a job from these people, and I even found myself like getting anxious with my own answer. I'm not going to change what I do, by the way, but I found myself getting anxious, and I was like, oh no, I don't do a good job. There, I used that word good. So it's like steeped in it, I had this teacher in seminary. The class was called Issues of Women in the Christian Tradition. And really what it was is global feminism. And we had to read basically a monograph each week. And I want to say write like a 3-page entry paper to class. That was a lot of work. And the rules were, the first thing you had to do was appreciate the unique contribution of the author. You had to do that before you could say anything like, and I wonder. Normally what I said is they did a bad job with these things, because I just feel like that's how I got trained, is to like look for the chinks in the armor. And it was a really interesting process. And it's a good way to practice this, right? When I get through with a movie or a book, to say, what were they trying to contribute, that I could really say, like, courageous or creative. And then the question, instead of like, what did they not do well, it's, I wonder. Makes me wonder about, and if those were the kind of the ways we critiqued books and people and music, I just think life would be more enjoyable. I think that's what he's trying to say, right? Like, hey, this did not meet my needs, but I see the needs it was trying to meet. Lila, we're just going through either the epilogue or the book in general, and how the practice is working out for us. So we're just kind of doing some omnibus reflections here. And if you have anything to share, we'd be grateful.
I want to thank all of you on the screen. I've really enjoyed all of you, and this book has been it's been quite challenging for me. Pardon me. And I'm working on the very simple takeaways of how I talk to people, how I guess what they're feeling, and the thank you notes, which is, I'm at a very fundamental stage. But I appreciate this book because it's changed the way I think, and it's changed the way I treat people. So truly, I want to say, out of my usual way of thinking and acting, and that's precious to me.
Yeah.
That's precious to me. And what what I found with after my initial forays into guessing how people feel, I've gone to more general emotions, and I've had better success with that.
Could you say more about that? Like that about that journey? Are you saying you started very specifically?
Well, sure. I just started with my impressions of usually the person I live with. Most of you know him. Some of you know him. Not that I want to call him out, but I can never tell when he's joking or being sarcastic. After 21 years, it's problematic. So I just started guessing. Okay, are you feeling anxious, elated, angry, frustrated? And I'm always wrong. And he'll usually report an emotion that's more positive than what I attribute. And that's eye-opening for me to see, oh my goodness. I've had to sit with that for weeks, really. So I've gone to more things like saying, Will, are you feeling well rested? Do you think it's a beautiful day? It's like baby steps, but I don't know if he's noticed, but I've noticed, and it's made me a lot more relaxed just trying to guess his feelings, actually. So fundamental, but sometimes I'm just afraid to talk to people. lest I evaluate. So my fallback position is, how's your week been? Which I genuinely am interested in, or I don't ask that. I mean, and I try to remember what's important to my conversation partner can be important to me in that moment. And in my zeal for accuracy and precision, I don't need to offer my factual information or opinion. Generally, I'm here to report. Many people just aren't. They don't care what I think. So, I'd be lying if I said this hadn't been tough going, and I could certainly read this again. I wish he'd given some less dramatic examples, actually, because the dramatic, difficult situations are almost easier to read.
Yeah. That's
Right? But like when Mike, when I come in and see you in the investment room, it's like, hi, Mike. Not how are you? Not have you had a good week? But when you asked me how I was feeling, I did give you a specific lighthearted. So that was, I think I've told you more than I know.
Well, your willingness to be vulnerable with the process and the journey, it absolutely makes me feel safe, because I'm struggling with this too.
I'm so glad. I learned that from my mother, and actually from an old friend of mine that used to say, well, what are they going to do? They can kill you, but they can't eat you. So thank you, Mike. And
really hear the gratitude coming from me. And this is like, I know this is kind of corny, but this whole bit about gratitude, like through the namaste or through like some kind of gesture, it's sort of heart touching for me, you know, to like take a moment and like salute somebody. It's like, it's really cool. I mean, it probably would freak them out, but to me, it's like really, really cool in a moment to like, and Julia was there last night. We watched Raya and the Last Dragon, and they all do this like dragon salute to each other. You know, the namaste thing is a little bit weird because people do this thing a lot and it's sort of like, okay, like, thanks. So like sometimes doing something extremely different and bizarre is like curious to me. And like there's people, oddly enough, and I should out myself probably. I'm probably the hardest person to practice on the screen. Because if you say like, how are you doing? Boy, that's a tough one for me. I'm not even sure I always know how I'm doing. So that's going to be really hard. And you probably want to pick somebody easier to practice on. But I am often drawn to the tough ones, you know, honestly. And like if I'm having a complainer, it is nice for me to try to say like, okay, well, and what could I appreciate about this person? And that's about the internal voice. Okay, well, if I had to appreciate something, what would it be? And what's really weird, right, is apparently I'm really good at doing this with other people. Good, I just used that. Apparently other people enjoy when I do this. They'll complain and they'll say, well, have you considered this thing? And they're like, oh, I hadn't, and that's really helpful. But I don't always do that in my own head. You know, like I'm kind of wretched at doing it when there's not other people around.
Mike, I love the progression. It's actually on the cover that starts with empathy and collaboration, authenticity, and then freedom. Mm-hmm. Some of the doctoral students that I've worked with, that didn't finish were always an enigma to me. I had one student who got all of her data done. The committee went through and reviewed it. It was right at the last minute at the end of the semester, and she had filed for graduation. She actually borrowed my cap and gown for her graduation. And she had to come back afterwards and the next semester and just finish some of the final points. She never could finish that. And those students that are all done, but they're finishing that last, it's such an enigma to me, because you would think that this freedom, they would be so glad to be done, that would be the freedom. And yet there are students that come up right to the end and then they can't finish. And that's been really hard for me in my career, to see students that just drop it at the very end.
You know, it's been really helpful for me as a parent. I have to, because you see, use this really interesting phrase, and this is the nonviolent twist I'm trying to make in my own life. I used to have trouble with my teen son because he would not do things, and I would say he wouldn't do that. And it's been really helpful to use the phrase you use. He couldn't do that. And it's this weird thing, like, if I can make room, that some people can't finish the degree because that's not what they needed anyway.
Probably that's right.
And it's hard for me because I have my dad didn't finish anything. And so like this drove my mom nuts. And so I'm a finisher, damn it. So like when I see people come to the brink and not finish, I'm like, do not do that. Do not be that person, you know. Yeah. But that says more about me than about them, you know. And it's this weird thing, right? Like between can't and won't. And I do wonder if that isn't like, I'll just speak for myself. A lot of times I put that evaluation won't, instead of actually maybe they don't have it in them to do it. And if they don't have it in them, then they don't have it in them. They probably don't know why. Why is one of the worst questions you can ask, if you don't mind me saying, especially of your kids. It occurred to me when I asked my kid, like, why did you blank? There was no answer he could tell me that was going to like deter my upsetness, because why more often is an accusation. That's right. And how do you like chill an accusation? It's pretty difficult, right? And I just sort of wish I'd read this a long time ago, because I think the later we start, the harder it is to correct the patterns, you know. But there's opportunity in it. I was walking the dog today and there was a staple, you know, a landscaping staple on the ground. And in general, I pick those things up that I perceive could like be tire danger. This one probably not so much, but I saw it and I walked by it 5 feet and I turned around and I picked it up. And it's really interesting for me to use the NVC and say, you chose to pick that up. Now, instead of saying like people should not throw their crap on the street or people should be more careful, I chose to pick it up. I'm not like patting myself on the back, but it is a lot more life-giving for me to say like, I lived into my values today, even if that's the only way.
Yeah.
Mike, have you done this with Emory, or has anyone done this with like a small child or tried?
Yeah,
young
you know,
child?
what I've been working on with Emory, and this drives my wife crazy, because in general, my pattern is I read these like self-help books, and then I try to use this language, and my wife's like, oh, there you go again. So like when I first read it, I was like, let's talk about meeting our needs. And my wife was like, do not talk about your needs again. but I do this with Emory, and I'm like, I'm not sure what your needs are. It doesn't seem like they're being met. And or like, hey, I see that you need autonomy and I need my counter clean. Like I need the order. So let's talk about how we can both get our needs met here. And Emory's like, I mean, because nobody talks like that. Nobody. I don't know what kind of therapy she's going to need when she grows up. But like it seems to me like you just sort of do it, right? Or like, hey, I saw you choose to do that. I saw you choose to do that. Or, like, and I've read all these parenting books that say the similar stuff. Instead of looking at a piece of art and saying, I like your colors. Oh, you chose several different colors. Like you chose that. Tell me about your choices. It's like, well, that's not a compliment at all. It's not. It's curiosity. Why do we need to compliment everybody so much, right? And that's where the Alfie Kohn book was super interesting. Like Punished by Reward talks about praise and reward as much as it talks about punishment and how they can kind of do the same thing. We're trying. And Emery's already decided she's a teenager. God bless her. I mean, she's like, oh man, she's a different one. A lot of this actually kind of comes natural to her because she knows what she wants. Like unlike frankly me, she knows what she wants, and so like I don't want her to lose that, and I want her to be able to articulate like this is the need behind that thing. Like that would be really cool. I'd feel real successful as a parent. Look, I need success. I evaluated myself. I would really enjoy talking to my daughter about her needs if she had clarity around them. It seems like just the sooner the better, though, knowing that our kids are going to go to school and that the teachers may not use these kinds of terms, it doesn't matter what school you go to. I was at a school presentation at a great school where a teacher got up and said, I read a book this summer about tests, and the more tests, the better. And I just sort of inwardly groaned like, no, I just read a different book. And I wanted to say like, no, I didn't say that. I just sort of thought like, we both perceive different needs in students. I wonder how the students' needs can be met. Yeah.
Mike, we just, on a kind of a slightly different subject, I'm head of the program for the teachers over here in Arizona, and David Berliner, who was president of AERA, American Education Research Association, and he was dean of ASU, and I brought him to U of H Clear Lake when I was teaching there. He has a lot of wonderful statistics because he's a statistics guy. I'll send you his PowerPoint. It was very powerful. You might want to share it with your teachers on testing, the impact of testing, and we don't need them. The teachers know where the kids are. You don't need all that standardized testing, which only tell you stuff that you don't need to know. Yeah.
I appreciate that. I will say, if it's okay to name one other like kind of rock I hit up against, is if I try NVC with certain people who aren't used to it, they actually don't want it. Like if I say like, how are you feeling about your body today? They'll say like, why can't you just tell me I'm pretty? Well, I could, but I don't want you to live on my evaluation. I'd like to know you think I'm pretty today. Like this is, and this is where there's a good reminder from my colleague who introduced me to this, like you don't have to do this all the time. And I actually heard Andy Doyle say this really carefully back in May, not through this language, but somebody said to Andy, like, hey, like you seem like this friendly guy, and then sometimes you talk like the bishop, so which one are you? And Andy said, well, I like to think I'm myself all the time, but if you make me talk from the bishop's seat, I will do it. And like, I'd rather have the conversation, but if you force me to be the position, I will be the position. And I think that gives me some clarity, like if I've got an employee, and I don't, who's like not doing their job, I don't have to say to them always like, oh, like, help me understand your needs. I can say like, hey, I've got serious concerns about your performance because the needs of the organization aren't being met. I can lead with that because that's a position that allows that, right? Or we can have the NVC communication at the end of the day, though, I've got a position that they don't have. And I have to honor that position on behalf of the folk, right? And all of us are in, like, have been in different roles with folk, and so we have to do that sometimes. We can do it with respect and dignity, but sometimes, right, when the needs of the organization aren't being met, then we have to make a decision based on that. We can do that I mean, there's always some violence in saying, like, hey, you're not meeting the needs of the organization. There is always some violence, but I think it's protective use of force to say, in order to protect the needs of the folk and the budget we have, this is going to be a closing conversation. Now, we can never guarantee how people hear what we say, but I do think, like, knowing that we've tried is probably pretty important to our sense of integrity. Julia, please.
Just one thought. So that essay that Mary sent early on, and that idea of, like, forcing somewhat violently, like, people to be vulnerable, right? I don't know. It just has sort of stuck in my mind, like, you know, maybe not everybody wants that type of communication, and so being aware of it is important, I think. Yeah.
You raise a great point, and to be honest, I don't always want it with other people, and this is where I think it's okay to put a couple of things together, right? Like Brene Brown talks about trust being earned in small moments, and it's like not appropriate for me to lay my soul bare with somebody who is either proven that they're not going to be a fit container for that trust, or because I don't have the energy to put that trust in somebody, right? And I don't want to speak for every psychologist, but to me, if I meet somebody the first time and they say, hey, like, I was abused by my dad as a kid, I'm immediately going to think, like, wow, that was really inappropriate, that share, because you don't know me. I guess I could say, like, how very free and liberating of you, but, like, I have not done anything to earn your, I mean, look, if I'm wearing this, okay, and we're one-on-one, but like in a Sunday school lesson where we're gonna, you know what I mean? Like, it just makes you wonder a little bit, right? About, like, wow, you must have a need for somebody to hold you, but this is not really going to get your need met. This is going to make people run away from you. Darlene, sorry, I think you were ready, and I think I overtalked.
That's okay. I'd just like to echo the concept that it's not appropriate with everyone. Yeah. Not everyone is comfortable with intimacy. And like you said, right, we're not comfortable being intimate with everyone. And so for me, it's a matter of respecting other people's boundaries, respecting other people's comfort levels, so that it's a respect thing, that we pick and choose who to use this with, and who to be vulnerable with, and who to ask to be vulnerable with us. So it's not withholding. For me, it's not withholding. It's just respecting who they are and their comfort levels.
Thank you. Well, I think that brings us to a good gateway moment where, like, we can decide where to turn. So where to turn. I feel like we finished this book, although I would be grateful to do like an annual, like, or a semi-annual, let's come back and talk about it some more, and like how it's playing out for us, and maybe we reread it, I don't know. But the thing to do next is always the interesting question. I have a few thoughts, and I'm very happy to be for different thoughts than my own. So maybe I don't need to lead first. And by the way, I don't expect your participation, but because you're actively participating, it occurs to me I should ask you first. Do you want me to lead with some ideas, and then you can say, like, oh no, or oh yes, or something like that? So there is this Brene Brown book that's coming out called the Alphabet of Emotions, and it's going to be in print, I want to say November 30th, which is kind of about when we're going to meet next, because I'm not going to be here Advent 1 or able to get on the screen at all. It's called Atlas of the Heart is what it's called. And it comes out yeah, November the 30th. So that would be timing. Really what she does is it's kind of like describing emotions, because a lot of times what the book brought up is, hey, I might say like, I'm feeling betrayed, which is not a feeling, right? It's an evaluation. So that's a book we could read. That would be a continuation of this journey and hopefully enrich our emotional vocabulary. We're getting ready to do lectionary year C, which is the Gospel of Luke. And there is an interesting book on the Gospel of Luke that I've got on my shelf. It's called Living on the Plain by some Episcopal priest. So we could read through that as a way of reading through Luke. It would be the staging point, not the end. Maybe those were my two initial ideas. There's also a training I've done with Brene Brown called Daring Greatly, and I am a certified facilitator of that, but maybe that's a little bit harder to do over Zoom because you miss like 50% of communication on Zoom. Like you get a little bit of tone, but you don't get necessarily body language, and that's meant to be like a really kind of a confidential group that talks about that. And you lock into it for about 6 weeks is how long it takes. And there's videos and discussion, but that might be a little deeper. I haven't offered it yet. And if I don't do it now, I'll do it when I get back from my sabbatical. Darlene, please.
I vote for Living on the Plain.
Okay, now I don't want to be self-serving with that because I am the author of that book.
I know you are, and I have the book and I've read it and I want more. And if we capture you on the Zoom with it, I'll get more.
Okay. Well, I would imagine if we do that.
That's pretty self-serving of me.
No, actually, I mean, I think it's kind of fun to start with a conversation of that because actually my thoughts on it have changed since I wrote the book. Otherwise, I wouldn't be me. But I would be grateful to do that. And we'd probably read that through Epiphany, to be honest. Like we would probably read that Advent and Epiphany, which would take us kind of up to Lent. And I don't know if any new folks would join or y'all on the screen would be interested, but I'd be more than happy to do that.
I have a question. I've not read any of Brene Brown's books. Should I where should I start? I mean, I looked a little online and she made a suggestion. I don't remember now, but would it be helpful to read one of those before her new book comes out?
I think it probably would be helpful to read one of hers before the new ones. It's really hard for me to say what you should do, but I do think that Daring Greatly is probably like the one to start with. And then if you wanted to dial down on like some opportunities to enter into like joy for yourself instead of like evaluation, The Gifts of Imperfection is a great follow-up because it has practices. And it's like the premise of the book is like, hey, being imperfect is a gift to the world. And there's some swaps I can make. Like, I can trade one way of thinking or emoting for this old way that's not life-giving. I do think the world of the books, even though I feel like I've moved beyond them, what they do is they give a shared vocabulary more than anything that if enough people start to use, and it's like, okay, now we've got these words in common, and we it's hard to you read these books and talk that vocabulary to somebody who hasn't read them because they're like, that makes no sense to me. But there's enough folk that are reading these books that are like connecting. But for me, Daring Greatly is where I would start, and then The Gifts of Imperfection is where I would get second. And there's other people on the screen that have read these books that I think have found them helpful.
Thank you.
I vote that, I mean, I would like to do all of the above at some point. That's how I feel about that.
Thank you. And we probably will. And so maybe giving Atlas of the Heart a little more time to come out because it's a little bit longer. I also think that during Epiphany, we're probably going to hear some appreciative inquiry into world religions on a weekly basis in the evenings. That'll be like an evening program I hope I'm going to put together. I'm hoping to get the Imam over and the Tibetan Buddhist over and one of the rabbis over to do theology on tap. When the Imam comes, it'll be root beer. But, like when we do the other folks to talk, like broadly defined from your mouth, like what's your story? and what's a practice that's been really life-giving that you wish other people did. That's where I hope we end up Wednesdays in Epiphany or Tuesdays or something like that. If you have other thoughts, please email me, because I know some people work best that way, but I'd like to hear that all of the above are interesting and that we've got some play here. You all have read books I haven't read, so that's always helpful to hear what's nourishing you.
I'm with Julia on that.
Okay. Peggy, maybe you were getting ready to say something. No, okay.
The only book I guess I mentioned is The Fault Lines, which gets into family estrangement, which has been a hot topic. This guy that wrote that book, Fault Lines, was on CBS this morning. He's also being used by bank trust departments to educate their trust officers' biggest dilemma is families that don't get along. And then when the senior member passes away, is sometimes when you see sometimes the worst of families. So they are training, a lot of the banks are training their trust officers how to deal with family estrangement. And they like to have that resolved before their client passes away on them, because then it's really hard.
Is this Carl Pillimer?
Let me go get the book. I'll be back.
Thanks, Lila, for that recommendation.
I've enjoyed it, and I listened to the audiobook where Desmond Tutu's contributions are read by him. Have you? And then the Dalai Lama reads his, and then there's the interviewer is the narrator.
I read the book. That's one of the few books I read instead of listening to on Audible or something. But I did read it, and I thought it was interesting. It probably would be even better to hear them in their own voice.
It's lovely to hear how playful they are with one another.
Okay.
It is Carl Pilmer.
Thank you.
Pillimer.
Okay, I'm checking it out right now. Okay. Okay, thanks everybody. If you have other thoughts, let me know, but I really appreciate doing NVC with you. And please feel free to say, hey, that thing you said, maybe you have an opportunity to say it more non-violently. Grateful for you all.
Thank you.